Good evening. I have a little announcement to make at the end of today's video, so stick around for that, if you please. The names of the lines on the Underground are a varied bunch. The majority are named after the companies that originally built them. That's the case for the Metropolitan, District, Bakerloo, Piccadilly, Hammersmith and City, Waterloo and City, and Central lines. The Circle Line, of course, is named after the route it takes, and the Victoria Line is so called because it serves Victoria. The Northern Line would have been named after the places it served. In the 1930s, there were never completed plans to extend to Bushey Heath and Alexandra Palace, which would have made it the most northern route. And then you have the Jubilee Line. There was no railway company called Jubilee, there is no place called Jubilee, at least not in London. What's the story? Well, in the end, it comes down to politics. The Jubilee Line was originally going to be called the Fleet Line, and as I've said in past videos, there was a lot of debate over which direction it was going to take. They knew London needed another underground line, but they didn't know where it was going to go. It would take over part of the Bakerloo line as far as Baker Street, then make its own way to Charing Cross, that was for certain. Then from there it was likely going to go to Fenchurch Street. This would have taken it along Fleet Street, London's infamous Street of Shame. It would have had a station at Ludgate Circus, probably about where City Thameslink is now, and just before that it would have passed under the River Fleet, after which the street is named. So far, so sensible. Fleet Street, River Fleet, Fleet Valley. The colour grey was chosen for the new line because, you know, fleet, battleships, battleship grey. It's the sort of pun that you come up with at 3 in the morning when you've been working for 18 hours. The first stage was approved in August 1971 and things got moving pretty quickly. Unfortunately, as these things tend to, the project suffered from delays. So much so that London Transport actually stopped advertising the opening date because it was, frankly, getting embarrassing. Meanwhile, things were happening. Political things. In 1974, Horace Cutler became the leader of the Greater London Council following the resignation of Sir Desmond Plummer. In many ways, Cutler was an odd choice to lead the GLC, being as how he didn't believe in it, or in big government in general. In fact, he held an inquiry to determine whether the GLC should even still exist. As for London Transport, he viewed it as a hotbed of communism and described it as an albatross around the neck of the capital's ratepayers. In fairness, there were definite problems with the way London Transport was run. It was stuck between two poles. On the one hand, it was expected to provide a public service for the greater benefit of London. On the other hand, it was expected to be profitable. It's very difficult to do both. On top of that, the trade unions at the time were extremely powerful, making cutbacks almost impossible. It's no wonder under the circumstances that management were kind of ineffectual. Cutler very obviously had the knives out for them, and in particular for London Transport chairman Ralph Bennett. There was a campaign that frankly seems more like a propaganda exercise than a genuine, good faith attempt to improve matters. In 1978, he appointed a civil servant named Leslie Chapman, who published reports with titles like London Transport's Failure to Carry Out Its Functions Satisfactorily. There were a number of mysterious leaks of letters between Cutler, Chapman and Bennett. Bennett accidentally worsened Cutler's vendetta when the latter came to London Transport headquarters for a lunchtime meeting and wasn't recognised by security, which caused Cutler to storm off and presumably resulted in many wasted sandwiches. I'm getting slightly ahead of myself here, but I think it's important for understanding the nature of the relationship between the leader of the GLC and the management of London Transport. So let's skip back a couple of years to the 1977 GLC election. 1977 was also the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee. This was a massive occasion, including a royal world tour, a televised celebration, watched by an estimated 500 million people worldwide, and parties up and down the country. Tower Bridge was repainted in red, white and blue, a colour scheme it carries to this day. Jubilee fever gripped the nation for the whole year, and Cutler was right there to jump on the bandwagon. He promised in 1977 that if elected, he would have the Fleet Line renamed the Jubilee Line. Wait a second, an election promised to rename railway lines? That sounds eerily familiar. Cutler won the election, and now it seemed that the absolute mad lad was going to go ahead with renaming the line. Objections were raised by London Transport, who felt that they hadn't been given sufficient warning. The biggest objection was money. Signs had already been produced. Literature had been printed. Posters had been put up, all identifying the new line as the Fleet. It was going to cost at least £50,000 to fix that. There was also the very obvious point that the line wasn't actually going to open in 1977. Had objections only come from London Transport, then Cutler would probably have ignored them and maybe punched Ralph Bennett in the face. But the GLC Passengers Committee also came forward and complained that it wasn't exactly cricket to whine about London Transport wasting money and then force them to waste £50,000 more. Furthermore, they argued that Fleet Line is a name with historical and geographical meaning, while the Jubilee was, so to speak, a fleeting event. The risk of alienating voters did stir the GLC into action of a sort, and they published a statement that the Jubilee is an event of such importance as to deserve commemoration. They justified the cost as not excessive, and argued that it should be viewed in the context of the extra tourist trade the Silver Jubilee has brought to London this year. In any case, by now it was too late to change the name back. London Transport had already begun making the changes. You'll often hear people saying that the colour of the line was changed from grey to silver, but come on, it's still grey. The following year, Cutler's war on London Transport wastefulness would begin in earnest. In May 1979, the first stage of the Jubilee Line from Stanmore to Charing Cross would open, 2 years after the Silver Jubilee. There's a rather ironic postscriptum to all this. I mentioned earlier that the second phase of the Jubilee Line was going to go to Fenchurch Street. Tower Hill was also considered, by the way. But beyond that, nothing was certain. Cutler argued in favour of the line running through the Docklands as part of the regeneration scheme. And of course, the line did wind up running through the Docklands as part of the regeneration scheme, although the extension wouldn't open until the end of the century. But as part of the wrangling between government and big business, the section between Charing Cross and Fenchurch Street was abandoned, in favour of a new route through the underserved suburbs south of the river, nowhere near Fleet Street or the Fleet Valley. So the name Fleet Line would have wound up irrelevant anyway. I guess you could say that London Transport snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed this pugnacious tale from the tube. If you did, then it would cause me to see new beauty in the world if you would click the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more content like this. Another great way you can get more content from me is by listening to the Railway Mania podcast, on which I am the guest this week. You can listen to us rambling on about trains, tubes, and unorthodox possibilities of time travel. I'll put a link down below. Thanks as always to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the grey to my tube map, but in a good way. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.